All right. I'm going to talk to you about subsistence, demographics, and technology. It's probably going to be a slightly truncated version of this lecture. I'll also post some videos to help with understanding and with your assignments, the details of which will be in the announcement that I send out. But let's get started. I'm going to start by talking about how anthropologists study subsistence, demographics, and technology in different types of societies, and then we're going to talk about some examples from different types of societies. Firstly, it's important to talk about adaptation. I think we've talked about it a little bit before, but it's essentially how an organism adjusts to its environment. Many organisms, and as biological anthropologists study it and biologists study it, they adapt via inherited physical traits, so genetics and things like that. Humans adapt primarily through culture to different areas. Cultural ecology is a branch of anthropology, also called ecological anthropology, that studies the relationship between culture and ecology. It studies the impact that humans have on their environment and the impact of the environment on the humans that live in those regions. Sorry if you can hear dogs barking. They are definitely doing that right now. All right. Biomes and subsistence patterns. Biomes are areas that are distinguished by particular climates, certain types of plants and animals. Basically, the environment in different areas, and these regional areas are called biomes by several different types of scientists. Cultural ecologists study the relationship between biomes and human sociocultural systems. So essentially where different societies live, how that impacts their culture, and how human societies impact these biomes. And then subsistence patterns are impacted and or limited by environmental factors like rainfall, sunlight, and soil types. Obviously, in areas with really fertile soil, it's probably going to be easier for people to grow crops, whereas places with less fertile soil will be ever so slightly less likely to be places where agriculture is occurring, depending on what type of society we're looking at. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Anthropogenic landscapes or anthropogenic landscapes are essentially the results of humans impacting their landscapes. All societies do this. Each type of society does it to a different extent. Here on the, looking at your screen on the left, you can see a city. This is caused by industrialization. So pre-industrial societies, you won't really see this type of city happening. And then on your right, that was on your left, and on your right you see terracing, which is an intensive horticulture and agricultural impact on the landscape. And it's essentially when the land is slanted, is on a hill or something, you can build terraces into it so you have flat areas to grow crops. So all humans impact their landscapes. It's just on a different scale depending on what type of society you're looking at. Demography is the quantitative and statistical aspect of a population. So demographers study the changes in size, composition, distribution, human populations, and the consequences of decreases and increases in human societies. So demographers are looking at things like how many people of a certain age are in a society, or a certain gender, or how many people die at what age, what's an average lifespan, how many children are born each year. All of these types of things fall under demographics. Demographic anthropologists focus on three variables, which I sort of just briefly mentioned. Fertility. Basically, they look at birth rates. So that's going to be how many children are born per 100 people or so per year, depending on what types of societies they're looking at. Mortality is, how many people die. Death rates, average age of death, life expectancy. And then they also look at migration, which is moving into or out of an area. Variables influencing fertility and mortality that anthropologists look at are fecundity, which is a variable of fertility. So fecundity, a variable influencing fertility, is essentially the age of puberty and menopause, nutrition and workload, all affecting the number of children a woman could possibly have in a society, in a particular culture. And that varies, obviously, or else anthropologists probably wouldn't study it quite so much. Then they also look at life expectancy, the average life expectancy, which is affected by disease, nutrition, sanitation, standards of living, things like that, medical care. And not only do these things vary from society to society, but they're also going to vary over time as even small-scale societies become more globalized and have more access to things like medical care from international groups. And then we have variables influencing migration. So migration can be voluntary or involuntary. And some examples of voluntary migration would be moving to a new place for more space, better job prospects, other economic reasons, and then there are involuntary reasons to move, and that could be because you're trying to get away from war, you're being forcibly evicted from land, things like that. And they're also affected by push-pull factors. So a push factor is something that's pushing people out of a place, and that could be something like conflict. And a pull factor is something that's pulling people towards a place. So maybe having more freedoms in a certain place would pull people to go to that place. And then there's carrying capacity. This also affects demography. It'll affect how many people can live in a certain biome, in a certain specific environment. So the carrying capacity is the maximum population an environment can support. It's determined by the environment's potential energy and food resources. So you'll see how different societies or different cultures live in different places that have different carrying capacities. And it's not just determined by sort of strictly the environment, it's also determined by the types of subsistence methods that people use. And then there's cultural aspects that affect population. All cultures have beliefs that affect fertility, mortality, and migration rates. Different religions have different takes on how many children each family should have. Governments sometimes dictate how many children people can have. For example, China had a one-child policy until last fall, where it became if you were an only child, you could have 2 children. And that was to try and control the population. Individuals and households make specific choices about fertility, mortality, and migration, about how many kids to have, about whether or not to move someplace. And then there are different birth control techniques in different types of societies that will affect how many children you have, things like that. Technology. So the anthropological definition is a little bit different than what you're familiar with day to day. The techniques and methods humans use to acquire food and modify or control their environment, that's essentially what technology is. So it's going to be physical tools, things like a cell phone or a spear or a shovel. They're all technology, but it's also going to be cultural knowledge. So it's going to be things like what's edible, What's poisonous? What animals are more likely to kill you? These are all still considered technology by anthropologists. And it's also considered the basic and primary source of sociocultural change. So, as new technology is developed or introduced in a society, other aspects of that society will start to change in response to it. So that's basically most of the definitions that you'll need to know as far as um, how anthropologists study these different things. The next video, we'll talk about modern foragers, hunter-gathering societies, and how they're examples of all of these things.